Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Cupid's Coach podcast. I'm your host, Julie Ferman, inviting you to transform me to we through your very own process of doing dating better than you ever have before. Now, today, we're going to really dig in on a topic I've been wanting to talk about for a long time. And I was waiting for just the right person, the right expert to bring on to the YouTube channel and the podcast to share it with you. And her name is Kat Hurley, and she is in Albuquerque. She's a psychotherapist, and she specializes in grief and divorce and life transition, identity after divorce, building resilience after major life transitions. So basically what Kat does is she helps people rebuild meaningful lives after death, divorce, illness, life's hardest transitions. I'm so happy to have you on the program. Welcome, Kat.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. I am a nerd for all kinds of grief, and I definitely think divorce grief is not spoken about nearly enough.
It's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the program, because there is grief after divorce every single time.
Absolutely. And, clients come to me and they say, why does this hurt so much? No one died. And my response is yes, but so much did. There are so many losses that are just inherent in divorce. Loss of self, loss of the partnership, loss of hopes and dreams for the future, loss of extended family, friend groups, loss of the ways that relationships happen. Sometimes loss of a co-parent, or in the way that you imagined it, financial security, daily routines, all of these things. And those are each individually huge, huge losses. And they are grief, but it's a special kind of grief. It's not the same kind of grief that we think of when we think of like a death loss. This is something called disenfranchised grief, which is a term that was coined by Dr. Ken Doka. And it means it's a grief that's not recognized by society. As society at large, we judge grief. We really do. We put a hierarchy on it. And we don't typically recognize divorce grief as something that should be grieved, as real grief. It's not something where you get the sympathy cards and people bring casseroles and you get bereavement leave from work. You don't get any of those things, those community supports, those institutional supports that you get when you're grieving a death loss. So disenfranchised grief is extra hard because it's not getting that same social awareness, support, ritual. All of those things are missing, which makes it very isolating.
It's really true. And there's another category that deserves to be mentioned. I heard from one of my boot camp clients yesterday, a lovely, lovely, beautiful man who lives in the Bay Area. And he sent me a picture of his dog who he had to put down yesterday. And I know how much he loves this dog and is attached to this dog. And that one is disenfranchised as well. Let's include pets, shall we?
Absolutely. There are so many losses. I mean, pets are one. Losing infertility, struggling with infertility is absolutely one. Miscarriage that we don't talk about nearly enough. Family estrangements are a really big one. That's one too. Military deployments. There are so many different types of griefs that we don't honor as grief. And it just makes the griever feel that much more isolated and sort of not validated in their true and very real feelings.
That's absolutely right. And as I was studying up on you, I love this quote. It's about what you do for people. I sit with what's heavy so you don't have to carry it alone. And so one of the things I'm always focused on is what we call the crisis of loneliness in today's society. It's never been more pronounced and profound than it is right now. Our stupid devices are not bringing us closer to the human experience, that's for sure. So one of the things I wanted to ask you is about, the difference between being alone and being lonely.
Yes, and there is such a huge difference. Being lonely, I think, is an experience that anyone going through divorce is very well versed in, because the type of loneliness you feel when you are with someone and lonely is so much more painful than a kind of loneliness you might feel on your own, because that lack of connection, the lack of love, affection, all of the things that you hope for in a really functional, healthy partnership aren't existing. And that is a type of loneliness that is pervasive in relationships that fail, where you are alone in the relationship. And that's incredibly painful, because right there, you're losing all of those dreams, those hopes, the ideal of what you hoped and believed the relationship could be. Whereas being lonely, certainly on your own, just being alone, doesn't have to be lonely. Being alone can actually be very empowering. And for many people, that space to be alone with their thoughts and their feelings is the number one way to process things like divorce grief. Just being able to sit with the feelings. How do I actually feel? And sort of like what happens in the movie Runaway Bride, I'm definitely dating myself, but reimagining, figuring out again, who am I now? What do I like? What are the pieces of me that I'm gleaning from this marriage? What do I want to take with me? What parts of me? And what parts of me is it okay for me to leave here that don't need to come forward into the next iteration of myself? And I think being alone is a great place to start doing some of that work. And it doesn't have to be lonely. But also there's the idea of you understand you're alone. Once you have made a decision to divorce and you are now going on a path that is just yours without the partner, then you have so many opportunities to decide what that path looks like. That's one of the really brutal things about grief is we all have grief in this life. None of us are exempt. We will all have it, and it will be the soul-shattering grief that can really break you down, at least for a while. No choice in that. Where our power comes from, where the choice it's in what we do with it. We have the option to decide how we carry our grief and how it changes us. And I think that is incredibly empowering.
Absolutely.
The 5 stages of grief is Kubler-Ross. Yes. And I've actually done some of her trainings, which are truly phenomenal. But there's something a lot of people don't know. And Kubler-Ross's research on grief was done with people who were dying, not people who were losing someone they loved. And that's a big difference. People who are dying are experiencing preparatory grief. Meanwhile, people who are expecting a loss are experiencing anticipatory grief. And the feelings and the loss experience can be very different. So I do think, so the acronym for the 5 are DABDA: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So those are what people usually think of as those big 5 of grief. But the way Kubler-Ross presented it was finite and linear stages, and it would go from one to the next thing. And then once you were done with stage 1, you did your denial, now you're into anger. And it was prescriptive. It went from one to the next. And what we understand with modern grief theory is it's not that clean. Grief is very messy. And the model that I like to use is Strobe and Shute. And it's the dual process model of grief, where grievers are really vacillating back and forth between loss orientation and restoration orientation. So what does that mean practically in everyday life? With the loss, it's focusing on the loss, allowing the tears, reconnecting with the person, establishing continuing bonds, memories, maybe visiting the cemetery, wearing their sweater around the house to feel close to them. And that is balanced with restoration orientation, dealing with the probate, going out with friends as a person without that person, as a single, and when you've always gone as a couple. So those activities that are kind of focused on moving forward as the world is now. Because with any grief, there's a really big before and after. And the feelings that come up are so varied. I mean, in grief, there's anger, fear, numbness, frustration. All different emotions can come up in our grief, and they are all valid because everybody's grief experience is completely individual, and the feelings that come up are due to them, their previous history, their life experience, and the nature of the grief at hand.
True. Very helpful. Some people listening listened to my last episode where I basically dropped the bomb being that Mr. Ferman and I are actually getting divorced after 35 years. And I have another man in my life that I'm going to marry, which is just bizarre. And it happened very, very quickly, although I've known this gentleman since college and haven't connected with him for 45 years. It was amazing. But the reason I bring it up is because you mentioned that when we are going through a divorce, it's not just this person, it's family connections too. And that was very real for me because we just had an important bar mitzvah in California for our nephew, and I didn't feel like I should go. The whole thing was not about me. It wasn't about guilt. It was about him, and I didn't want to bring any of that uncomfortableness to the process, so I just didn't go, and I sent messages to people to let them know that I wouldn't be there. But it was painful for me because I love his family. I have just been part of the glue of that family forever. I intend to be part of that family as I can, but the pain is very real.
Absolutely. And it's that now, where do I fit? Once you initiate a divorce, then there's so many questions about role in the family and where are you supposed to be and what you should and shouldn't do. And renegotiating all of those secondary relationships that relate to the primary relationship is incredibly challenging. And, some people say to me, well, I initiated this divorce, so I don't have any right to be grieving. And that's baloney. Absolutely. Because there are so many losses within the divorce. Why do people stay, even in a marriage that isn't working? Because there are good things and because they genuinely love their partner. Compatibility is a separate issue. So untangling all of the togetherness and trying to figure out where you fit in their life and the extended family's lives, what your couple relationships look like now that you're no longer a couple, it can bring a lot of grief because there can be so much joy, even in a relationship that's run its course. And it's really hard to let go of that.
And I was reading something this morning about twin flames. This gentleman, Mark, and I, we are twin flames for each other. But one of the things that we picked up as in reading about it is that twin flames prepare for a reunion. And the last 2 years, there was a bit of a crisis, actually a serious crisis in our relationship. And I didn't feel like I could upset the apple cart. I didn't feel like it was the time to split up the marriage. I took one for the team. I moved to Denver with Gil. The boys were both going to be there, and I thought I want to keep the family together. But I kind of made a decision that I was going to bloom where I was planted, and I wasn't going to be miserable. I wasn't going to make other people miserable. I just knew that we had entered a new chapter of the relationship. So I had time to sort of grieve the death of the former relationship, even though we were technically still living in the same house. And so it helps to do that, the preparation work, and to become a separate individual before moving into something else. I went through grieving a lot over the course of the last 2 years. As I was recreating a relationship with myself.
Yes, and that is the biggest part that I think people miss in terms of opportunity in the grief of divorce, is recreating that solid foundation relationship with yourself. And the idea of creating the life that you want for you. So as you move forward, if you are interested in being in a new relationship, that you are solid. And that you learn, that you use the grief as a way to help you propel to the life you've always wanted, because that is always a possibility. But reconnecting with self is about making sure that you know your needs, that you understand what you need for yourself and in a relationship, but also figuring out how to fill the gaps of all those losses. If you are losing these relationships, if you are losing these hopes and dreams, what hopes and dreams about your future are going to replace them? What relationships are supportive and nurturing in this new phase of your life? What will help ground you and support you as you move forward into this next transition? And I think cultivating those is so important, but also ritual. There are so many rituals that we do in our everyday life that make us feel normal and comforted, makes us feel like, oh yeah, I'm in my life. I understand what's happening. Simple as walking the dog or having morning coffee and sitting in a particular chair. And a lot of those rituals are also lost or broken when there is a divorce. So figuring new ways to create ritual for yourself that belong to just you can be very grounding and stabilizing in a time of loss.
Yes, indeed. I really, really miss my daily ritual of walking the dog. I left the dog with Gil. I paid for the training. I did all the early stuff, but I just couldn't take the dog from him. It's more important for him than it is to me at this point in life. So yeah, there's grief there. And the rituals, you're absolutely right. I began some rituals that really pulled me through. I think sometimes we kind of need to have a crisis before we're woken up to a reality. And I was kind of kidding myself. And then the crisis happened and I realized I'm on my own. I felt like I didn't belong in the marriage. I felt like I didn't matter. And those two things were really rough for me. I couldn't stop crying. And then I began to realize I belong in my own world. I belong to myself, right? And I matter to myself. So that's when I began fortifying in those 4 o'clock in the morning yoga, meditation, prayer work, the disciplined routine that I have created for myself. And I've kept it. I still do that morning ritual. So it's the preparation work and the grieving work. I didn't know during that time that I was grieving the loss of a relationship, but I was, and I still am, and I will be. It will take time.
Yes, absolutely. And allowing that grief to be bigger is okay. Grief just shows up how she shows up, and it makes our grief so much harder when we judge ourselves for it. Anytime there's I should be in grief, I would encourage anybody to take that word out. Your life is hard enough. Your grief and your pain are hard enough without judging yourself. Yeah. So let it be. It is exactly what it is. But one of the other hard pieces that you just sort of touched upon is the ambiguous loss of divorce. Ambiguous loss is something that researcher and family therapist Pauline Boss came up with as a concept, and it's the idea of a loss without closure. Closure was a big word in grief for a long time, and we don't necessarily think of it that way anymore. Now, the idea is sort of learning how to carry your grief and move forward with it. There isn't really closure for a lot of different griefs. Some there may be, but for many, that's not a realistic expectation. So I always think of it as helping my clients learn how to carry it better. But the other issue, certainly within a divorce, is the ambiguity, the uncertainty of not knowing when will this end. Some divorces drag on for years. How long is this going to take? And that the person is physically present on the earth, and psychologically very present maybe, and then physically absent from you, then they're present, even if they're not in your life anymore. They are taking up mental space. And that kind of here but not here is the heart and the core of an ambiguous loss. And that can be incredibly painful too, because it doesn't feel like there's an end, especially if somebody needs to continue to co-parent with somebody, there isn't an end. The relationship needs to continue, certainly for the children. And that uncertainty, ambiguity, how does this look moving forward? How do we do this now? That can add extra pressure and stress to the grief.
No question. So a couple other things I wanted to touch on. I thought it was really cool in studying up on you that first you were a dancer, you did hospice work, and then you worked for Healing Heart Center for Grief and Loss. And then I loved that you did something called Good Grief Camp, which was for kids. Anything you want to say about those early days when you were learning about grief and really embedded in it as a course of study?
Grief found me very unexpectedly. I was never intending to kind of fall in love with it and become a huge grief nerd like I am now. I was actually planning to go back to school for occupational therapy. And while I was, accruing my volunteering hours and all of that, I was working at a Trader Joe's in Connecticut. And one day, my boss asked me to take the flowers that were left over at the end of the day and donate them because a hospice facility was opening up down the street. And he said, "Oh, you can take a tour on the clock if you want." And I was like, okay, hospice to me sounded like old people moaning and urine, and that did not sound appealing. But my other option was stocking fish in the freezer. So I was like, yep, gonna take a tour. And the tour was guided by a hospice social worker and some of the families who had used this hospice for their loved one. And I had like a religious conversion moment, and I am not a religious person, but something in me just knew on the spot, this is what I'm meant to do. And I signed up. I became a family support volunteer. That's where I worked for the Healing Heart Center for Grief and Loss and the Good Grief Camp. And I immediately started facilitating some of the grief support groups for families who've lost a child or a parent, siblings who've lost a parent or another sibling. And I didn't know there were quite so many griefs in the world. And as someone who at that point in my life hadn't lost anyone, I hadn't had a close death loss to me, I didn't realize that I had already grieved so much. I mean, one of my big griefs at that time was losing my dance career and all of the identity and the routine and the ritual that went with that. And I was hardcore grieving that, and I didn't even realize it. So a lot of my initial work volunteering for grief was me learning about my own grief. And one of the beauties in that is when we start to recognize all of the cumulative grief in our past, we can also recognize our own resilience. That's where you see, well, I've had all of this grief and I made it. I'm here now. And being able to plumb from all of those experiences, the positive ways that I coped, helped me to figure out a game plan for when I did lose someone who was very important to me, which was my mom, that I lost 2 weeks before I graduated from graduate school. And learning about grief and being immersed in it, it certainly didn't prevent or protect me from any pain, but it did help me to engage with it better. And that was something I hadn't expected.
And you were robbed of the experience. It's a harsh way to say it, but you didn't get to have the experience of your mom seeing you graduate.
Yeah, that one was really, really rough. But you know, one of the concepts I love in modern grief theory is the idea of continuing bonds. And it's this idea that instead of like getting over, moving on, that part of our job as grievers is to find ways to maintain the important parts of that relationship for us. So that sounds a little bit woo-woo, but what does it look like? That could be just visiting the cemetery. It could be sitting in a quiet corner of your house and in your head or even out loud speaking to the person, wearing their clothes. There's a wonderful company called College Quilts that will make a quilt out of old t-shirts or clothing items. So making a quilt from your loved one's belongings and being able to literally wrap yourself up in things that were theirs, watching movies you watched together, listening to their favorite music, cooking their favorite meal on their birthday. These are all ways to stay connected. And I think actually Mitch Albom says it best in Tuesdays with Morrie. He says that death ends a life, not a relationship. And I think that can be very hopeful for people who are deep in their grief, finding ways to hold on to the pieces of the relationship and the person that were so important to them.
Yeah, some people think it's woo-woo, but
So children grieve both similarly and differently than adults. One thing about children's grief is it cycles much faster than ours. Now, the prevailing wisdom is that it's important to be honest with children about losses and death. Children are emotional sponges. They're constantly taking our temperature because they need us for survival. So they can read our emotions much better than we give them credit for. So they know if something is off. And being honest with them, age appropriately, of course, but being honest with them about a loss, what it looks like, what it's going to look like, and answering the questions they ask is really, really important. Giving teens, adolescents, the space to grieve is really important. But in that stage of life, their peers are most important to them. So for a 13 and a 15-year-old, I might recommend a support group for kids of whose parents have died, because many other children, adolescents in that group, are going to have a similar experience of a new person being introduced. And most of the time, kids of that age relate much better to their peers than to us. So that's one piece. Another piece is they also are into music, like using any of the arts, listening to songs, finding songs that are meaningful to them, that are about how they feel, and being able to listen to them together. Like, tell me what you love about the song. What are those lyrics? Can offer often a window into how they're feeling within that grief. But it is normal that it might cycle faster. 1 second, they might be surly. They might be not communicative, and 10 minutes later, they're, oh, I love this lunch. Thank you so much. And that is developmentally normal for the stages that they're in. Letting them experience all of their feelings, knowing them, validating them with boundaries for behavior, certainly, that they have to continue to be respectful, but allowing them time with their peers, perhaps connecting them to other adolescents who've had very similar experiences will help them deal with that aloneness.
I think what you said is really helpful, to just sit in a quiet place and invite a communication. What would she say? What do you have to say about this situation? Do you have a recommendation for how I might handle this situation? And you sit quietly and you listen. And I think that's a big, beautiful message for people. It truly is.
Absolutely. And another technique that I like to use, some people feel weird just asking the question in their mind or feel uncomfortable sitting still. And particularly for adolescents, that can be really challenging. Another technique I love is to write the person a letter, dear mom, and just tell her everything you're thinking. And for teens, I often invite them to write that on dissolving paper. It's something you can buy on Amazon so that they can take it to a river, a pond, a body of water, the ocean. And the ritual of watching that letter to mom dissolve heightens it to have more import, to have more grounding and more weight, and the sense of something bigger than self. And that in and of itself can often be really healing.
I love that. That's a great thing. I've done workshops where when you're ready to let go of something, you write it up and you burn it, or you tear it up and throw it in the barbecue pit or whatever. All of those things are meaningful, and I like to do them myself. And I think for grieving, it's helpful too.
I do too. I think heightening things to a point of ritual gives them more weight in your emotional mind.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I think that's important.
Beautiful. I'm curious if you can give us an example of someone who was really, really struggling with grief and found their way with your help into a place of wholeness and healing again.
I worked with, early on in my career, a physician, a female physician, who lost her mother, who she was close to, and her baby very close together. And the work that she did was so transformational. I mean, working on grieving all of the griefs of infertility, of a miscarriage loss, plus what it means to lose a mom as a woman, what it means to look at potentially parenting in the future without your mom there, all of those things. And the couple of people that I put together in my mind did a lot of work on looking at their own loss histories and how they coped. And that helped to give us a lot of ideas for direction for how to cope now, what would be the best thing for them. But also they spent a lot of time focusing on creating new ritual and bringing those people with them, bringing the baby, naming the baby, and actually having that hoped for, wished for child be a part of their life in some way. There was acknowledgement within their home, but also being able to maintain a connection to her mom throughout all of this, throughout this grief. How did your mom teach you to grieve? What did you learn, even implicitly, from the way your mom grieved? What would she want for you? What would she want you to remember about yourself or about her to help you through this? And using all of those things to slowly build a scaffold around this grief so that it's manageable. Because most people's fear with grief, particularly with a dual gut-wrenching losses like that, is that if I actually feel it, it is going to be so overwhelming that I will fall apart and I will never put myself back together. And so that's where I come in. Part of my role is as witness, as container, and as someone, a guide who has been through this with many people before, to say, I can hold this with you. This is not going to kill you. I promise. You can feel this and be okay. And when people can lean into that and trust that, the transformations are incredible.
Completely. I'm thinking of the way my mother dealt with my dad's death. He was 60, she was just 51. And she really did stuff it. She was so afraid that if she opened up the floodgates, that she wouldn't make it through. And so she just sort of, got tough about it. But she never really grieved it. Like, I remember her incredible tears when we lost our first dog, big, beautiful German Shepherd. And she raised that dog and she trained him and she brushed him and fed him. I mean, he was her dog. And when they had to put that dog down, the sound of her wails when she was hugging my dad and grieving over the loss of that dog, it was, even though I was young, I was probably maybe 8 years old or something, it was hard for me to hear. And yet at the same time, I knew that it needed to happen.
Yes.
And then years later, when it was her husband, the love of her life, I don't think she ever did it. And she carried that weight with her. And it's like what you were saying earlier. It's not just the loss of someone. It was the loss of a lot of other things. So,
absolutely. There's so much loss, the loss of security, the loss of financial stability, the loss of the idea of what the future was going to look like, loss of status, loss of safety, certainly financial safety. There is so much loss embedded in the financial picture as well.
The purpose of having this podcast is so that people will know that there are things that we can do rather than just stuff it, deny it, pretend it doesn't exist because we're afraid of dealing with it. You got to go into it but in a way that's methodical, and you guide us through that.
Yes, absolutely. You don't want to get flooded by the grief because that isn't helpful. You need to take kind of dosing in grief, which is a Dr. Doka concept where our brain can't grieve at 100% all the time. Impossible, which is why we have periods of numbness and we can throw ourselves into work for distraction or something else, Candy Crush, whatever it is on the phone. But those things, taking breaks from your grief is healthy, and that's okay. But ignoring it completely, the grief will get you. If you don't deal with it, it will come for you. So again, your power lies in making the choice, in deciding, okay, I'm going to open this up and I'm going to look at it. And if you can do it in a situation that makes you feel held, that you are not alone, with somebody who understands grief and is comfortable sitting with it, because that can be a big ask for friends and family members. And a lot of grievers feel like there's kind of a time limit. Well, it's been 3 months and they're sick. My friends are sick of hearing about this or that. Grief has no timeline. And often it needs the space to be big, to be heartbreaking, and to have those feelings come up and come out and be witnessed by another human who says, it's okay. You are going to get through this. And
it's cute that
work.
The two grandchildren, the youngest of them is very expressive. And he said to his dad, it's been 6 months. You have waited a respectful amount of time. It was just adorable. And the first thing was when he saw me, he just gave me a big hug, embraced me instantly. But we all have our own way of dealing with it.
I work with most people one-on-one, although I do also occasionally work with couples and families who are grieving as well. But generally speaking, first, when somebody comes to me, I want to understand the situation of loss. So we will spend some time digging into that. Then we'll usually look at loss history to find out what other losses the person has had, because losses compound. So every grief you have is related to all the griefs you've had before, and they all bring each other up a little bit every time you have a new one, and they just compound on top of each other. So learning about someone's grief history, often families have legacies of grief as well. There is so much implicit messaging in families about how grief should be dealt with, what grieving should look like. So unpacking a lot of that to see, okay, what did you actually learn in your family of origin? And what does your culture dictate or your religion dictate? And does any of that resonate for you? Or does that not work? So keeping the things that do work and then figuring out, almost like a birth plan that you have when you're going to give birth, it's a grief plan. Okay, so let's map it out. What does this look like for you? Where are you now? And that's really a lot of feelings identification, very emotion focused therapy of figuring out exactly what the nuance of the feelings are, because it's not just sad. There is so much under that. The frustration, the anger, the fear, the regret, the relief sometimes, and all of these things mingling together all the time can be confusing. So parsing out exactly how somebody is feeling, all the different feelings that they're going through. And then once we figure that out, figuring out, how do you want to feel? If you feel healed, or if you feel like you have now processed, what does that look like? What are you doing? How do you feel? What does your life look like? And then how do we get from here to there by taking these griefs in bites, finding out what is the emotion that's hitting the hardest? And for many people, it can be a surprise that it's irritability, or it's, I'm numb and I can't feel anything and I'm afraid I'm just never going to deal with it. So getting to the core emotions, what is the most distressing for the client right now? And then coming up with usually almost scientific experiments. Okay, this week I want you to try A, B, and C. And let's see how you felt after doing each of those things. So I do give homework, and then a client will come back to me and we'll discuss, okay, well, since A worked, I think the next step for you is this. B didn't work. So that means we're not going to do this particular kind of work. So figuring out what is resonating with an individual and what they need to get them to where they want to go.
Now, how is it that people can find you online or anyway?
They can find me on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook as Kat the Grief Therapist. It's with underscores, but I'm also available on my website. My website is Latin. It's Alice Folat Proprius Place. That actually means she flies by her own wings, because that's how I conceptualize the work that I do. I am here to help people learn how to use their own wings again and then let them fly. They can reach me via phone. My phone number is 203-293-2005, which is a direct line to my practice. So any of those ways, I do put a lot of content on my socials. So if people are just kind of flirting with grief therapy and want to see a little more about what I'm about and what it would be like to work with me, that's a great place to start.
Anything else you want to share with us?
I think a lot of people feel so alone in their grief. And if you are one of those grievers, I want you to know that you're not alone and that grief is actually one of the only human experiences that connects us all. Your grief actually connects you to everyone that's come before, all of your family, all the strength that you have, all your friends, everybody who's important to you. We're all connected through our grief. It's okay to lean into those systems and use them to help support you through it, because there is a way through. Elephants grieve too. Elephants circle up and they kind of rock. You can literally watch them mourn.
Wow. It's so brilliant that you specialize in this. I have been looking for someone to talk about this for years, and you were the person. Kat Hurley, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
So thank you for giving us your time. I really appreciate it.
Truly my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, take all this to heart. Go check out Kat, the grief therapist, with underscores in there. And you go out there and transform me to we for yourself. Thanks for being here.